Okay, so welcome back to another virtual tasting with Binny's. I'm Pat from the Whiskey Hotline, along with Brett, of course. We got people coming in still. Special guests today from the Balvenie distillery, Balvenie's malt master, David Stewart. And we have, as it global ambassadors, Naomi and Neil. Is that the correct title?
Oh, I wish. U.S. ambassadors. So I'm
Okay.
here on the East Coast, and Neil takes the West Coast. So we divide up the U.S.
Yeah, I'm definitely
US
not ready
global,
for that amount of power.
Yeah.
All right, so they're going to help out with the tasting today. Obviously, we do want to talk to David a lot. David has been at Balvenie for how many years now, David?
Well, it'll be 59 years come September. Started September 1962.
Wow.
So yeah, 59 years.
What was your first role at the distillery?
It was I joined as a whiskey stocks clerk in the whiskey stocks department. I was very lucky to start on the right side of the business because my boss, the gentleman who managed that team, was a master blender, which I really didn't know anything about that when I started. So I really just started doing clerical work, and I really did that for a couple of years. Just marking. We didn't have any computers in these days. It was all done in big stock ledgers, just adding whiskey that was filled and marking off whiskey that we used in our blends back in these days. And just, I think when I got to that, I was 17 then. So when I got to 19, Hamish Robertson, who was the master blender back then, brought me into the sample room. And that's when I started to get trained in nosing. And so you would bring, so I'd nose the very little samples that came through. It was really from Glenfiddich and Balvenie, new make, and maybe the Grant's Standfast blend that we had back then. Then, of course, Glenfiddich was launched in 1963, so we're getting samples of the Glenfiddich bottlings as well. And I just nosed everything that came through the sample room. Hamish would bring in American oak barrels and Spanish oak sherry cask. Let me see the difference between American oak, Spanish oak. He would bring in whiskies from different ages, to 3, 5, 8, 12, right up to 30. To show me from the two different wood types, to show me how whiskey evolves as it ages. And I get sent to the distillery for training up at Balvenie and Glenfiddich, down to our grain distillery at Girvan, because Girvan was opened in 1964. And just gradually I was selecting the whiskies for grants, selected the whiskey to go into the Glenfiddich, 8 years old it was back then. And I did that right through, into the early 70s. And I was very lucky that in 1974, Hamish decided to leave the company, and he moved to William Lawson Distillers as their master blender. And I really just kind of kept things going over the next few months. I think the family were looking around the industry to see if they could bring in someone with a bit more experience as their master blender. But luckily for me, they didn't find anyone. So I think at the end of 1974, I got the job as the company's master blender. So I looked after Glenfiddich, Grant's, and the Balvenie, which was launched really in 1973. So I was looking after all the company's whiskies. I did that for the next 35 years, right through to the end of 2009. And I could have retired from the company at that stage, but I was asked, would you like to carry on my malt master role for the Balvenie, which I was delighted to do. So really, for the last 10 years, and slightly over that now, I've been working just on the Balvenie single malt whiskies. And we've done quite a number of things over the last 10 years. We've refreshed the single barrel range, we've lost the tons, the new travel retail offerings. So we've done quite a lot over the last 10 years, and we've got quite a number of things in the pipeline that Neil and Naomi will know about, but we can't maybe mention too much about at the moment. So yeah, it's been a big, great career role for me, and I feel very proud and lucky to work for this great family company.
Yeah, it's remarkable that it's still a family company, despite what for many years has been the #1 selling single malt in the world, right, with Glenfiddich.
Yes.
Can you give the viewers a kind of an example of the size difference between Glenfiddich and Balvenie? before we went live, Brett was talking about how, Glenfiddich tends to be big and industrial, and it's kind of interesting that on the same campus, there's this small kind of, you hate to use craft now because everything is craft, but that's craftier feeling, smaller distillery, a more hands-on distillery, it seems, at Balvenie.
It is. I mean, the Glenfiddich distillery is a lot bigger than the Balvenie. It probably can make about 3 times what the Balvenie can make. And it probably sells maybe between 3 and 4 times the volume, case volume, than Balvenie. But Balvenie is doing very well, to be fair. It's in the top 10 single malts, and we've got Glenfiddich's #1, Balvenie's 4th or 5th, Monkey Shoulders in there too, to be fair, in the top 10 malts. So we've got three malts from the company in the top 10, and with Glenfiddich being the #1. Partly because the family decided to take that risk back in the 60s to actually release a single malt. So we got this head start. We probably had about 10 years almost without very little competition. And the other whiskies like Glenmorangie, Macallan, Glenlivet were kind of launched roughly around the same time as the Balvenie in the early 70s. So yeah. So we've now got Brian Kinsman now looks after, he's the company master blender, so he now looks after Glenfiddich and Grants and Tullymore Dew and Canadian whiskies and other whiskies as well.
It's pretty amazing too that you've seen an awful lot, because you would have been, investing in Balvenie in '74 when, the Scotch business, whiskey in general, was sort of hitting at a point, right? That's when it really kind of started flattening and plateauing a little bit, right? Because you guys would have had to shut Convalmore 10 years later. You shuttered or mothballed Convalmore in '85. Yes,
we did buy that distillery from Diageo for visit that we wouldn't open it as a distillery. So we still use the warehouses from Convalmore for storing some of our whiskies. Yes.
And of course, then built Kinninvie and built Elsa Bay also when just at the beginning of a boom.
Yeah, Kinninvie was 1990. And so we've got 30-year-old Kinninvie now, and the Ailsa Bay was 2007. So so there's a few releases of Ailsa Bay out there now at the moment as well. So it's over 12 years.
So how much involvement as those whiskeys, because you would seemingly be very busy with Balvenie and everything else. How much of the other sort of newer projects crossed your desk while you were working on Balvenie?
Well, I created the core range for Glenfiddich. I mean, you've got the Solera vat behind you there. So with myself and a team, we created the Glenfiddich Solera. We got all the vats put into the warehouse 8 to the trough. Decided on the different proportions of the American oak and Spanish oak and how to marry in the tons. So that's one of my favorite Glenfiddich, to refer as the 15-year-old Solera.
Mine too.
Yeah.
So I've not been involved much in Ailsa Bay, to be fair, but I was involved a little bit in Kinninvie, and some of the expressions there. The very first one, I think, was a 23. It might have gone to Taiwan, the very first one.
Right.
In Kinninvie, but the core range of Glenfiddich, which is still there today, was really my involvement. And Brian's done a lot of limited releases since over the last 10 years on Glenfiddich. But the core range of 12, 15, 18, 21, 30, 40, 50 are all still there. And these I had big involvement in all of these.
Is there one that sticks out of the Balvenie range that you kind of wear with the most pride, as this was my creation and it's just become a behemoth in the whiskey business?
Well, it'd probably be the Balvenie Doublewood, to be fair. I mean, that's the one that's a flagship expression. So that's one that I'm most proud of in the Balvenie range.
Well, why don't we taste that and talk about that a bit then? Because that's part of our little trio pack for our Father's Day gifts, I suppose. That's the one I have in front of me today.
Okay, well, I've got a little sip of it here too, but which is the one I've got. Yeah. So yeah, well, the Balvenie Doublewood has had its a flagship expression. It was launched in 1993, which was the centenary year of the Balvenie. So that's when that bottle that we all recognise was first used. And really, the Balvenie Doublewood evolved from the Balvenie Classic series. I don't know whether you remember the Balvenie Classic series, which was launched back in 1983. We did a no age statement at 12 and an 18 years old, and these were all what is called nowadays finishes, but back then they weren't given that name. So I created these three expressions by transferring whiskey from American oak barrels into Spanish oak sherry cask just for a number of months to see what the changes would be.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were, after 6 months, 7 months, we were quite happy with it, what had happened. It picked up colour, richness, spiciness, dried fruits, all these lovely flavours you get from the Spanish oak. And we decided to release these three Balvenie Classics in 1983. And that's at that point in time, we had a 10 years old Balvenie Founders Reserve, which really is a marriage of three different cask types: first fill bourbons, refill bourbon, and Spanish oak sherry cask. And that took us right through into the early 90s, when I was asked to kind of refresh the range to kind of celebrate the Balvenie centenary year, which is 1993. And we decided to change it into the bottle that we all recognise. So I thought, for one of the expressions, why don't we take the Balvenie Classic? And we renamed that as Balvenie Doublewood. We kept the 10 years old Founders Reserve, and we released a Balvenie single barrel 15 years old. So we had a marriage of whiskies with a single barrel and with a cask finish. And then 2 or 3 years later, the Balvenie Portwood joined that core range. The Balvenie Portwood is still part of the core range even today.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the core range, which must have taken us through the next 15, 20 years, these 4 whiskies. And it was probably not long after that Balvenie Double was released that this word finishing started to be used. And of course, I think Glenmorangie launched the Balvenie, Glenmorangie Portwood, I think, around about the same time. And of course, the whole industry now does cask finishing, not just the Scotch whisky industry, but all over the world. There's cask finishes from the US to Japan to other parts of Europe. So yeah, we were doing that back in the early 80s. That's a fact. That's about all I can say.
Well, you were definitely a pioneer, and you also have released, I mean, we've mentioned some of the highlights, but you've released unpeated whiskey and ex-peated whiskey casks. You've released a number of different wine woods. You've released, STRs. We had a question from, I believe, Olivia. Because you've experimented so much, have you had any duds?
We've had a few, yes. It's not all been plain sailing. We've tried finishing in cognac casks and Armagnac casks and brandy casks, and even some red and white wine casks that really didn't work for Balvenie. It just overpowered it, or it didn't change it that much. So yeah, so there's been some failures, which has been a bit of a disappointment for the global team, who may be looking forward to releasing something. And 9 months or a year later, we've got to go back and say, sorry, this is not really working. To be fair, they take our word on it, my word on it. If I'm not happy with the quality, then we don't release it. But we've had a number of successes, obviously, with the Portwood, with the rum, the Caribbean, and the number of rum finishes we've done, Madeira finishing. So we've done a number of finishes that have really worked for the Balvenie. And that's allowed us to do a number of 17-year-old limited editions. You mentioned these peated ones, the Isla cask and the peated cask. Now these were cask finishes, not what we're going to taste a little later, which is the actual peated barley.
The family too trusts David and Kelsey so much with this experimentation. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty cool thing to me. Like when I got hired, it was fascinating because I knew how much going into this job, how much tradition and the handcrafted side of things was a part of it. But it was also shocking to me how much innovation was allowed. And I think that's because of that trust. So even when we go, you know, maybe tour some warehouses with Kelsey or something when we're over, I'm always shocked by how many just random experimental barrels they have around. And, you know, you never know how many are really going to get released in bulk, like the Caribbean cask or something, but it's pretty cool to see that there's constant experimentation going on.
Yes,
Yeah.
the family encouraged us to do this, and just to get buy that cask, get some of these casks in, just try it and see if it works. So we've always got things happening behind the scenes in our warehouses, and you know, we've got a number of things, you know, boiling, you know, under the radar at the moment that which would have been released if it hadn't been in the kind of situation that we've currently been all in over the last sort of 15 months. Some of them for the airports, travel retail, which is not the best of times to release anything just at the moment in the airports. So, but that's hopefully, you know, later this year into next year that will change, and we can get some of the other ones out that we've been working on for a year or two now.
Yeah, it's nice, and it's not only, you know, one of the benefits of working for a family business, because you have many fewer people to ask, and you guys as a company are also very good at managing things large and small. So, and I would imagine that gives you more freedom because you don't have to do everything, taking a huge risk doing something in a massive amount. You can do some smaller things and there'll be a place for them, and then do bigger things, and maybe it turns into a part of the core range.
That's it. That's in it. Yeah, we can make decisions pretty quickly being a family company. I know all the family. I've worked with around our third or fourth generation I've worked with in the company, so I know them all well, and I can get pretty quick decision. Yeah, just go and do that. Just go and try that. Yes, go and bring these casks in, and just see if it works. And that's allowed us to release a number of you know, limited editions and expressions over the last 20-30 years now. So yeah. It's this is the double wood, you know, which is it's a cask finish, so it's roughly 12 years in American oak barrels, and we say it's about roughly 9 months finishing period in these Spanish oak sherry casks. Now it could be 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, 11 months, but we leave it for 6 months without sampling it, because we know it won't be double wood in that length of time. Then after that, we sample every month. And then Brian, Kelsey, and myself, and then we'll decide, yeah, we're happy with that. That's consistent with what we've done before. And quite quickly, we'll ask the distillery, could you get the whiskey out of these sherry casks and get the whiskey into our marrying cask? So we've got these marrying tons, 2,000 litre tons, where most of our whiskies go to for a period of a couple of months or so before we bottle it, just let the whiskey settle, and then we'll bottle it, and then we'll use these sherry casks will be used for new spirit fillings of Glenfiddich and Balvenie.
So are they, when you do the finish for the double wood, are you filling into brand new casks, brand new sherry casks for those?
We are. That's okay. Yeah, we get dry Oloroso sherry filled into them out in Spain for 2 years, but they're brand new casks, so it's the first time they'll have had whiskey in them. So a lot of the kind of spicy notes you get in double wood actually comes from the wood. The oak itself gives it that kind of spices, dried fruits, all these complex flavors you get from the double wood. Yeah.
Sure. And it's nice. It takes a little bit, you get the benefit of the edge on the double wood, and that takes a little bit off, because I would assume the next whiskey that gets filled in is going to be there for a while.
Yes, it will be. Yeah, it could be there for at least 12 years, and it could be there for 18, 21, 25, 30 years, 40, 50 years, some of it, especially some of the Glenfiddich.
Sure.
So some Glenfiddich will go into these casks as well. Some will be using the Solera process as well.
Something interesting that you mentioned a couple of times now is that marrying cask, the marrying tons. Is that particularly common with single malt distilleries? I mean, I know I've seen them at the Grant distilleries, but I don't recall really seeing much mention of them anywhere else.
I don't think we're the only company to marry our whiskies, but we're probably the only company that've got these marrying tons, which are 2,000 litre tons. So we've got a marrying warehouse up at Glenfiddich and Balvenie, where our Glenfiddich and Balvenies will be married, and down in Girvan, our grain distillery, we've got another lot of marrying tons where some of our blended whiskies will go into as well. So yeah, we brought these tons in back in the 70s. Now there's no wood influence. It's just vessels to actually let the whiskey settle before we bottle it, rather than just sort of batting it one day and sending up the bottling hall the next day and bottling it. The other companies will marry as well, but they may marry in bigger vats, But we're unique, I think, in having these marrying tons, and of course that's where the ton expressions that we've released, the 1401 and 1509s, have originated from. That these marrying tons.
And then
David, you helped out,
are you proofing in the tons as well? Are you proofing down, or do they run somewhat like Soleras, where there a little bit will be left and they'll be filled, or do you fill, marry, empty, and then are you proofing in the tons or proofing somewhere else?
No, we'll empty the tons. We empty. We don't leave anything in them. So so whiskey goes in natural strength into these tons, but we will empty them. But it gives us the opportunity to maybe use, for example, the double wood, or even some of the Glenfiddich, to use 2 or 3 vattings. So we're getting a bit more consistency rather than just bottling one vatting and another vatting and another one. We've got a number of tons all filled with different vattings that we can actually mix different vattings together to achieve more consistency in the Glenfiddichs and the Balvenies whiskies. Some of the older Balvenies don't go into the tons, like 30, 40, 50, which are very small volumes. They're too small, so we might just marry these in traditional barrels. But it's the double woods and the Caribbean casks and some of the travel retail expressions that go into the marrying tons.
Well, why don't we talk about the Caribbean cask next? That's become, that's fighting toe to toe with Doublewood for us now, as far as popularity goes, it seems.
Yeah, it's doing very well.
Absolutely. I was going to chat on the Caribbean cask a little bit. This is the first Balvenie I ever tried, actually. So it has a very kind of special place in my heart. And it's doing, as you said, insanely well, almost, toe to toe with the Doublewood 12. And I think a big part of that is, so it gets finished in these ex-Caribbean rum casks. And it gives it this kind of nice, sweet vanilla finish that can help draw in people who might be newer to single malts. Maybe they're bourbon or Irish whiskey drinkers, are used to something a little bit sweeter, a little bit smoother, and that can help kind of draw them in. But on the flip side, because the rum that we use to season these casks is extremely complex, funky, savory, rich, decadent, that adds these extremely interesting nuances to it that also appeals to whiskey experts. So I've had people who've been drinking whiskey for 50 years say to me that they haven't tried anything like this. So I think that's part of why it's doing so well. It can kind of appeal to every corner of the market. And I used to work before this job at a rum bar. So it's probably the category I know the most about, after whiskey. And a lot of times people don't realize there are beautiful, decadent sipping rums out there. People don't always know that. So sometimes when they hear a rum finish, they go, oh, is it super sweet? Is it, like, it's not a Malibu cask we're using. Like, this is a really gorgeous rum that we've blended ourselves, actually, as a company to use in these casks. So we take it very seriously. I've tried the rum on its own. Usually the ambassadors get some samples to try and to, use kind of side by side with the Caribbean cask. And it's fascinating. It's this super full-bodied, hefty rum. because obviously it has to season a cask well enough to hold up to a nice rich single malt that's going in there. So it's a fascinating whiskey, as I said, kind of appeals to everyone from novices to experts and everyone in between. So really, really gorgeous.
Can you share what countries that rum is from as far as that rum blend goes?
So you can take this one, David.
No, I don't think we can.
Yeah.
It's just a blend of rums that we've accepted by sampling a number of rums. So the rum is sent into our distillery in tankers, and we fill that rum into our barrels, and let the rum sit in there for about 6 months. So it's soaking into the wood, and then we'll move that rum on to season other barrels, and then very quickly we'll fill these barrels with the 14-year-old Balvenie. It's been aged in the medical barrels.
Okay, and how long does it finish then?
Another 6 months, roughly another 6 months.
Okay.
So when are you going to release the rum? I mean, you've got some rum laying around.
We generally, when I was there, we sold the rum back to our supplier, because the rums, we probably keep it for about 4 years. So it's done about eight seasonings of casks over that period of time, and of course the rum's improving, being in our barrel as well. It's aging. It's not you can give it an age, but it's aging and improving. So we've actually sold it back to our suppliers.
Yeah, that would be very, because we've had the opportunity to try and carry a number of different rums from well-known producers, but not only sourced directly from the Caribbean, but also sourced from independent bottlers in Scotland, where the rum might be brought over at a very young age. There are a number of independents that bring over rums at young ages, and rather than aging in the heat climate of the Caribbean, they age in a climate like, Dufton, which is completely different. So, I mean, I'd be very interested in trying the rum just to see what that 4 years worth of aging in Dufton is versus, aging in San Lucia or, Barbados or other islands.
I'm sure we can get rum sent out to Naomi and to Neil if they just request it, maybe from Kelsey or myself, and we'll arrange to get some samples of the rum from our cask up at the distillery to be sent out to you, so you can get a chance to taste it.
I don't want to distract from the single malt, but that might be the best outcome of this virtual tasting.
I have some en route as we speak, actually, David. So next time I'm up in Chicago, we'll go and drink daiquiris with it.
Okay. Well, no, just request some rum and we can soon send it out to you, Neil and Naomi, and to let your colleagues taste the rum. Yeah.
David, I don't know if you remember, but on my induction, it was my first time over to Scotland and the distillery right after I got hired. And my day I spent with you at SBP, which is our bottling plant, we were actually sampling 4-month finished Caribbean cask samples. So we had all of these samples out, and we're kind of deciding which Caribbean casks, how they were looking at 4 months.
Yes.
And so that was my first kind of day with you, was nosing all these Caribbean cask samples, which was perfect for me because it was the one I probably knew the best. So yeah.
No, I do remember that.
Lovely.
Of course, we've had a golden cask, which was in travel retail, which was a different rum. It was same age of Balvenie. The whiskey was exactly the same, but it's a different rum because you have to give the airport something that you can't get anywhere else. We had to make it a little bit different from the Caribbean cask. And of course, the Glenfiddich 21-year-old used to be Cuban rum.
Really?
It was a Cuban, it was called a Cuban Reserve, was it called at the very beginning?
Yeah.
And then we had to call it Grand Reserva because and so it's still a rum. It's not Cuban rum any longer because we couldn't sell it in the US because it was a Cuban rum.
Right. I remember when that launched, and it was that in the Glenfiddich line has turned, of the high marks, that's turned into a very, very quick moving high mark for us.
Yes.
On the Glenfiddich side. So we were very excited to get it. And the original that's you've done a nice job of maintaining the consistency, because it really, quite frankly, hasn't changed much from when it was in ex-Cuban rum casks versus the casks it's in now. Still a beautiful product.
Yeah, no, it is. It is a lovely whiskey. Yeah. So yeah, we've done a number of we did a number of rum finishes as well. Just a Jamaican rum, which was actually casks that we brought in. I think we did a 17-year-old the Jamaican rum Balvenie, which was we brought casks in from Jamaica rather than getting the rum. So yeah, rum works pretty well with whiskey, and generally when I do tastings of our core range, and there's ladies at the tasting, the Caribbean cask is always the favourite one for them. Pretty much what Naomi was saying there. It's a great favourite with the ladies because it's so sweet, and it's not as spicy as the Doublewood. It's a lovely whiskey, and I'm not surprised how well it's doing, to be fair.
Yeah, Naomi, we had a question that here, since you've just stated that your background happens to be in the rum world and tiki room. Olivia was wondering if you could use the whiskey instead of a rum in a cocktail.
Yeah, so Balvenie in general in cocktails is a kind of a hot topic because, of course, some people go up in arms if you ever talk about the idea of using a Balvenie in a cocktail. And I always kind of answer the same because my background is in cocktails. And so essentially, no matter what spirit you're using, whether it's Balvenie or another nice spirit, the point of a cocktail is to showcase that spirit in a new way, not to smother it in a million ingredients. So if you want to use Balvenie in a cocktail, it's amazing in a cocktail. Of course, it's incredible. The key is just to find the right cocktail, that it's well balanced and delicate and interesting. It subs beautifully into classics like old fashions and Rob Roy's and all of that. So the key is just to make sure you're really just highlighting the whiskey. I have actually, that's a great question about the rum versus the whiskey with the Caribbean cask. So one of my favorites, when I was at this rum bar, of course, there were lots of daiquiris being made. And for anyone watching too, just to clarify, this is a really nice New York City cocktail bar. So I don't mean a frozen machine, scary neon daiquiri. I mean fresh lime juice from that day, little bit of fresh simple syrup and rum. Very simple, shaken, beautiful. And a favorite of ours, even before I had this job actually once in a while, was to use the Caribbean cask instead of rum in that daiquiri because it turned into this incredible kind of Scotch and rum marriage in this beautiful daiquiri. And also this was so, full bodied and interesting that it really holds up well. And I actually love experimenting with that in a cocktail for sure.
Well, that and daiquiri makes, because isn't the daiquiri is like the omelet of the cocktail world? Exactly, like a great chef, yes. if you can't, if you want to prove whether or not you're on your way to being a great chef, if you can't make an omelet perfectly, then you're probably not there. If you can't make a daiquiri, then you lose a lot of bartender credibility.
Yes, perfectly put. Absolutely.
Yeah. Omelet of cocktails.
Yes.
All there is to it, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Caribbean cask, wonderful whiskey. You mentioned it, Naomi, how like rich and full bodied it is. That's just something I've always enjoyed with it. It's a chewy mouthful of whiskey. So certainly something that I think a lot of bourbon lovers would really appreciate in the single malt world. But he's looking for something a little fuller and oilier, fatter kind of.
Yeah.
All right. Which whiskey should we talk about next year? Should we go to, what do we have? Week of Peat to taste? 17 Doublewood? Which one you want to do?
Yeah, Neil, take it away.
Let's go on. I haven't said very much yet, so I better chime in.
And then there was one, and then Neil, when you're done too, we're going to go back to David really quickly. Just one more wrap up. Olivia was curious about whether or not that it was difficult to marry whiskey. So let's talk about 17, and then let's go back to Mary.
Okay.
Yeah. So Balvenie 17 Doublewood, the last one of the bottles in the little trio pack that's available to sample the range. And it's a whiskey for me that is a little bit different to the first two that we've had. I think the younger Balvenies are a little bit more playful. This is a whiskey that really slows me down. This is like my good boy whiskey. I spend more time nosing it and just sipping away this whiskey. And it comes this whiskey was made for David's 50th anniversary of 50 years of working for us. And if you look back in kind of Balvenies of the past, 17 before this whiskey, the age statement of 17 was quite a big deal. There was always limited edition Balvenies coming out, an Isla cask finish. There was a peated cask finish. There was a 17. There was a rum. There was various kind of different 17s released. And then we settled on this one for quite some time. And it's made in the exact same way as the 12 Doublewood, but it just sees 5 extra years longer in the ex-bourbon casks at the start. And it is just a hugely rich, regal, decadent whiskey. And when we were speaking to Kelsey earlier, she described the nose of having like a sherbet nose to it. I don't really, sherbet was, it answers my kind of like how I describe this whiskey. I got green apple note on it. And that kind of bitter, that kind of bite from that is obviously sherbet in a professional nosing and tasting panel. And I just, I loved when she said that earlier. I was like, oh, I'm going to have to stop using the apple note now that I know what it is. But it's a whiskey that for me is the first one in the range that really fills your mouth. It gets under your tongue. It gets under your gums. That extra 5 years in cask just makes it so much richer, decadent, regal, and
So the finishing period's similar to the 12, though? I mean, it doesn't need a longer finishing period after that longer base time, huh?
No, it's roughly the same time as the 12. You know,
Okay.
roughly 8, 9, 10 months finishing time in the same Spanish oak casks.
Okay. And it's still a fresh first fill cask then of the Spanish oak sherry. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that certainly has a lot of flavor to contribute that first time around.
And we didn't, and then the component, the base component, is that 100% ex-American or ex-bourbon? Or
Yes.
you don't use any refill share or anything, it's all 100% ex-bourbon?
Not when we're finishing in the sherry cans. It's all American oak, same as the 12-year-old. It's all American oak. First, second, third fill American oak barrels. Yeah.
Got it.
So yeah, it's a lovely. It's just maybe slightly less spicy than the 12, you know, because it's older, and I got a lovely toffee sort of sweetness, richness on the taste as well. So yeah, it's done very well for us, and it's just you know.
I want to say that we heard that would be going away soon. Is that true?
It's possible that
Okay.
we might be discontinuing it over the next year or so. Yeah,
Okay.
possible. Yeah, and replacing it with other things that we've got in the pipeline.
Well, we got to celebrate the next anniversary, right?
Yes.
That's right. They need to. That's right. If you're 59 years, that means that they've got one more year to come up with something.
That's true.
Exciting things are coming. Don't worry.
Yeah.
So
I'm
the marrying.
Sure
So back. So just back. So then this is again just like everything to tie together the whole range. You're also going to use the marrying tons to finish this, just like you would any other product.
Yes, this one's big enough to go into the marrying tons. Yes, it is.
Okay.
And it just lets the whiskey just settle a little bit to make sure it's all mixed properly together. And there's not a huge difference because we sample it, you know, post-marrying, you know, pre-marrying and post-marrying. There's not a huge difference, maybe a subtle difference. But we think it's worth doing rather than just, you know, fatting and bottling, you know, very quickly. So
sure.
It's a lot of double handling, obviously, you know, to get the whiskey into these marrying tons and then get the whiskey back out again. The tons never move; they're all in the situ. But the whiskey's got to be piped in and then sucked back out again 2 months later.
Yep.
So
good.
But we think it's worth doing, and it's you know,
good pumps in a flow plate.
Yes, it gives us a bit of extra, you know, quality to the whiskey. We think.
Yeah, I'd say so.
17 too is if anyone watching or if you two are cigar fans, it's my absolute favorite with a cigar. My humidor at home, the 17 Doublewood, lives on top of it. The kind of those baking spice notes that are in there, that ginger, black pepper and all that goes beautifully with a pretty full-bodied cigar. So I always like to chat about that when the 17 comes up. So it really kind of helps complement the cigar and vice versa with the baking spice there.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So, I mean, something that we haven't touched on much yet is, you know, one of the more unique features at Balvenie, I would say, is that it has an active maltings on site, and a traditional floor maltings at that. Can you speak to a bit of that? Is this something that's been ongoing there as long as you've worked there, or was that dormant for a while?
No, it's been ongoing since long before I started. You know, we've been doing floor maltings. I think that maltings opened up in the 1920s. They moved from the original place which was the original sort of Balvenie house, where we did maltings, and it was now moved to where we are today. So yeah, so we've been doing malting our own barley for, you know, many years now. Some of the barley will come from our own barley fields, others will be brought in and malted. Now, to be fair, we still have to buy a good chunk of our barley in already malted, because I've outgrown the malted floor. But it's something that the visitors really enjoy seeing, because you can visit so many distilleries and never see that. And this actually shows, you know, what whiskey's made from. You can see the steeping, you can see it being laid out on the floor, you can go and see it being dried. So it takes a whole week to do all that process, and then it goes out over to the distillery and into the distilling, into the other processes. But it's something that the family are keen to keep, to be fair, even though it's roughly, I'd say, around about 15-20% of that goes into. So we mix the bought-in barley generally with our own malted barley. But we've got some of the barley that we've grown on our own barley fields. We've malted that separately, so that could be future releases will come from just the barley from our own fields at the distillery, you know, and matured in American oak barrels and Spanish oak sherry casks.
Are you using any different strains of barley when you're malting it on site there versus what you're bringing in from the commercial maltsters?
I think it's probably Optic that we're currently using. Yeah. I think that's Golden Promise is obviously Chariot we've used in the past, but I think currently it seems to be Optic that we're growing in the fields and that we bring in.
Yeah, I mean, it's currently got the higher yield, I'm sure.
I would say you would probably grow what is the most vital at any point in time, probably.
Yes. So yeah, so it's I don't know, many distilleries do that now, but maybe it can't be any more than about 8 or 10 distilleries have a malt floor out of the 130 distilleries.
Yeah, my mental count got to 7 when I stopped.
7, okay. So it's probably 7 to 10 at the very most.
Yeah.
And now that's up in Highland Park and a couple on Isla, or 2 or 3 or maybe on Isla as well. Springbank.
Right. Ord, technically you could kind of count Ord because the malting's right by the distillery.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a stretch, but you can kind of count it.
I'm sure the other global giant counts it. Yes.
Yeah. And then the Death Star Rosile, that's technically probably it's on the same property at least.
Yeah. If anyone ever gets a chance to see an industrial maltings, it's amazing. The one at Glenord, you know, with us having our own floor maltings traditional wise and seeing like Sandelin boxes as well. It was really interesting to get walked around Glenord by the manager of the place. It was really, really interesting. And if you can, I don't know how you blag it in without being in whiskey, but it's definitely worth looking at them malting it in that big scale.
Well, I think Glenord is
stealing a high vis vest from a different Diageo facility. Just walk in like you own the place wearing one of their high vis. You have to get in 100%. You have to get invited to the Guinness Brewery, and you have to make sure they give you a Diageo high vis, not a Guinness high vis, and then you tuck it away before you leave the brewery. Then you slap on your high vis, and you can walk around anywhere you want in Diageo facilities. Not that we've done that before.
No. Yeah, so yes, it's a great facility to have. And then the cooperage we mentioned too. So you can see everything pretty much at the Balvenie distillery, and then the Warehouse 24 experience as well, where you can sample your 3 casks in the warehouse there. So, and then a nice tasting at the end of the visit. So it's a 3-hour tour. So it's
certainly one of the better distillery visits I've experienced.
Yeah.
I've had over there for sure.
Yeah.
And so when you're doing most of your malting at Balvenie, you're doing conventional malt, but leading into maybe the next thing we're going to try for 1 week a year or for one batch. So explain the process behind Week of Peat.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, we started to do this in 2002. And we just decided to, as you just rightly said there, we just thought we would take 1 week out each year, and we bring in peated barley and distill from it. Yeah. And we've been doing that every year since 2002. And I've been sampling it over the years to see how it's evolving and what the quality is like. We put it into American oak barrels and Spanish oak sherry casks as well. So we've got kind of a variety of casks each year. And we did launch a triple peat week for travel retail, and an American oak version as well called Peat Week. Now it's part of the Stories releases, which is the Week of Peat, 14 years old. So it's only 5 parts per million phenol levels, so it's quite low in phenol levels. We didn't want it to be too overly peated. We still want it to be very much Balvenie, as we do with everything we do with Balvenie. It's still, with all the finishes, it still has to be Balvenie. We don't want it to be overpowered by anything. So so this is called the Week of Peat, 14 years old. Part of the Stories releases. You've still got that lovely honey sweetness you get from the Balvenie, you know, brown sugar, vanilla, all these nice flavors you get from American oak barrels, but you've got this nice delicate peat note or smoky note. Not hugely evident on the nose, but you could certainly get it on the taste. And it's been very well received. To be fair, people who do quite like smoky whiskies, but also like the kind of sweet Speyside style, and quite really enjoy this whiskey.
Sure. And is the Week of Peat the same week every year, or does it vary?
No, it's not. It can be different weeks. Generally, we've done it to maybe where we've been closing the distillery or just opening it up, and so we try and choose a particular time that's more suitable for the distillery.
Right, because you're going to go, because you would be, how often you do that once a year, and that's pretty common, right? For you to have a production shut down for a period of time to do maintenance and cleanup and repairs. And
yes, so quite a lot of it has been done either very late in the year or the start of a year, because generally we would close down, if we can anyway, around about over the Christmas period into January. Generally is the time that we would probably do some maintenance and close the distillery. So quite a lot of it has been done at the end of the year or the start of the next year. And then we have to keep the kind of feints and foreshots back, and that they go into the next year's production, so that we're not continually over the next 2 or 3 weeks producing a peated whiskey, which is not going to be called a peated whiskey as such. So
sure.
we've seen the odd little carryover. To be fair, we have to, from the vats and everything and the pipe work,
it would have to stick in the equipment for at least a little bit of time, right?
Yes.
I mean, they'd have to get something that would stick in the equipment for a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Naomi, how would you describe the level of peat on that? I saw you pour some for somebody that might not have tried this before. It's like, well, I've had Lefroy. How peaty is this? And it's not at all the same thing.
Yeah, so it's one of my favorites to include in tastings, because it always prompts like the best conversations with guests, because whether it's someone who is terrified of peat either having never had it, or maybe they had one shot a couple years ago of a crazy peated Isla, and which, by the way, I love. I always have Lagavulin at home. I love a really peaty Isla, but it can be very polarizing. It's very intense. And so sometimes people think all scotches are like that and they're terrified. And on the flip, some people are, love peated whiskey and all of that. And both of them I have great conversations with, because the people who are afraid of peat, I've jokingly called it like the gateway peated scotch, because it's that kind of first dipping your toe in the water of the peat world, because it's really subtle. It's not high phenols, as you said, but also the Speyside peat is really floral and earthy and subtle. So it's not that same briny, saline forward peat that you get from an Isla, which is obviously by the ocean. So it's a very different type of peats. I've held the two in my hands, like two pieces of peat, and they feel different. They're physically different. And so it creates this really different kind of more subtle, light type of smoke. And it's cool too, though, because even people who love peated whiskeys, such as myself, who will do really intense, Lafroigs and Lagavulins and all of that, this also is cool because for them, it kind of brings up this conversation of terroir in whiskey, and where you make it and where you get your peat from affects the flavor. And so they love trying it as well, because it's this really different type of smoke. And to them as peat lovers, that's very fascinating. So it's just the best conversation starter of a whiskey.
Yeah, it's a great.
Yeah, and you talk about, you said 5. I mean, if it's the phenols, if it's 5 ppm roughly phenol measure there, I mean, the 10 is generally right around the overt perceptibility. So it kind of explains what David's comment, which was, it isn't that it jumps out at you in the nose, but you feel it in the spice on the palate. And sort of like using the smoke, using this, it's just like cooking something or making a recipe, right? Using that little bit of spice is just another element. It's not the whole whiskey.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Just another element, because it's beautiful. It really is a great way to get people to not be scared of whiskey for which smoke has been introduced.
Well, no, that's it. We just thought it would be nice, something nice to have. We had no idea back in 2002 what we were going to do with this whiskey. I thought it would just be quite good to just have a little bit of peated stock in our stocks, as it were. So, and just as it gradually aged and we could see how it was evolving, we decided, and we've done a number of 14-year-olds, that was probably the right time just to release this peat week, as it was back in probably 2017. I think we released that. And then it's the same whiskey under a different name now, to be fair, called the Week of Peat 14. So, and we don't wipe out every year, so we've got stock still from 2002, which is now that's now what's 20, 19,
yeah, almost 19, yeah.
About 19, yeah.
19. So we've got opportunities to release older peated versions if that's what they decide to do in the future. So yeah. I might even have a 50-year-old peated whiskey back, way in the future.
What have you done any experiments with the maltines besides just running some peated barley through? There was another one from one of the Stories range, wasn't there?
There is. That's the Edge of Bunhead Wood, which was a heather, which we used some heather up to dry the barley together with the barley and heather. And so that allowed us to release this whiskey, because the heather came from this wood called Bunhead Wood, as it were. So that's at the edge of that wood where we've got the heather to put together with the barley to dry the whiskey. Now it's not produced something hugely different, to be fair, but it's maybe added a little bit more complexity to the Balvenie.
And was that also local barley? Was the not only the heather, but was the barley also from the estate?
Yes, the barley was from the estate as well. So yes, it was heather and the barley from our estate, from the family fields.
It was a really cool thing to be able to release kind of the first modern 100% homegrown whiskey. I know I've done a couple tastings with it, and it's just so exciting to be able to talk about that.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really cool.
It's a nice.
Yeah, no, we definitely had a lot of, you have a lot of loyal followers in various different various different parts of the country that were very keen to make sure that we got bottles of that when it came in. So we yelled and screamed a lot about Burnhead wood. Our friends from Nebraska say hello.
Yeah, okay. We brought in dark barley as well, didn't we?
Yep.
And, which is used in the brewing industry, maybe to make dark beers, roasted barley, and that's allowed us to release another. I'm just trying to remember, what's the name of that one again, Naomi?
Oh, the Day of Dark Barley.
It's called the Day of Dark Barley.
Mm-hmm.
That's a 26-year-old, is it?
That was actually, David, that was the summer I was born, was when it was the same month, I believe, was when that barley delivery came in.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's released.
So the second most exciting thing to happen to Scotch that month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a single barrel release, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it released single, yeah.
Yep,
Mm-hmm.
yep. We got some of that too, which was very much sought after.
Yeah.
We wanted to do a few things at the distilling point rather than being cast finishes all the time, but knowing we've got to wait many, many years before they'll be released. But so we'd like to do a few things right at the very start of the process rather than using casks, which obviously you could bottle something much quicker using a casks finishing process.
Yeah.
Well, it's a wonderful career, because a lot of people, it's often said for a lot of distillers and producers in the Scotch business, especially as they get a little further along in their career, that at a point you're no longer making things for yourself, you're making things for your kids and your grandkids in the next generation. And it's nice to be around long enough that you were, I'm sure, heavily involved in a lot of these experiments, and you've also had the opportunity to actually see them through, because I think there are a lot of cases where people start, but you never get to see what happens.
Well, that's true. That's true. So yeah, but Kelsey will obviously have our own plans in the future and what because that's what's kind of demanded of the Balvenie. People are always looking for something. What else is coming out? What's new coming out? So Kelsey will have some plans of our own, in the number of years ahead, to keep our Balvenie fans, interested.
Anything you can share with those Balvenie fans on what we might see in the future?
Is there anything, Naomi or Neil?
Just pretend your marketing people aren't watching.
I was gonna say, I think my boss is watching this recording, so
right.
I would,
we can block them if you want. Give us the name. We'll knock them out of the tasting.
But very exciting things, I can promise for sure.
Nothing's really a secret anymore with like whiskey leaks and what gets released because of labeling. So although we can't speak about it, there's plenty of sources on the internet that'll tell you what's coming out soon.
Yeah, you just got to search that federal label approval database and you will find.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's David. I don't know if you in the United States, our alcohol regulatory body, as one of the steps, makes public every single new product that's approved, sometimes months ahead. So when you have to if you're going to do something, you have to get your label approval. Most companies do it early. So that's one of our greatest sources of finding out what's coming. Okay. If you just watch the colas, then it's like, then you call your rep and say, oh, by the way, you guys just got label approval for, Squid Ink, Glenfiddich. Yeah. What's the timeline?
Right. Okay.
Which I think would be a horrible. I would think would be a horrible idea. Squid Ink, Glenfiddich would be a horrible idea.
I'd try it.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, how did you find out, you guys? Trying to be subtle. Ooh.
Well, thank you all. I don't know if anybody has any last questions for David or Naomi or Neil before we go. Hopefully we've answered most. If you have any follow-up questions, you can always email them to Brett or I at spirits@bennies.com. And if we don't know, we'll get you somebody who does. But thank you all for joining us today. This is great. Hopefully we had some happy dads out there with a little whiskey tasting gift as for Father's Day. That's how I'm going to spend the rest of my Father's Day weekend, drinking whiskey and ignoring my children. I'm not sure how unique I am in that.
That's it.
Well,
No, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, no,
Our
they've been
pleasure.
delighted to be part of it. That's it. It was great to catch up with you, Pat and Brett. Thank you. Thank you.
thank you. I
Yeah.
mean, we could obviously ask you questions about your history in the whiskey business all day, but at some point, I'm sure you got to go. So,
Well, and as things open up again, we hope to visit you. We hope to visit you in Scotland sooner rather than later.
yeah.
Okay, well, then we're delighted to meet you both there. That's it.
And we can smuggle some of those rums back too. So,
You could.
all right. Well, David, thank you. Naomi, thank you. Neil, thank you. This was an absolute treat. So I'm going to finish my glass of whiskey. Cheers, everybody. Happy Father's Day.
Okay.
All right. We'll see you guys next time.
Wonderful.
Cheers.
Have a good one.